All right. Hopefully, I am coming across well. So, we wanted to talk about a problem we're hearing more and more about, and we have some new and exciting capabilities. And so, we thought this was kind of an open discussion. We wanted to start with just this. So, that problem is moving from field results to lab reproduction. Or another way to think about it is sort of replaying user journeys. Okay, so a bit about the problem. Um, so you have some field data that suggests there's some sort of performance metrics problems, some sort of metrics are subpar, perhaps your core web vitals. Um, Maybe you're getting this information from Page Speed Insights or Chrome User Experience Crux results, which are available for all pages. Um, Maybe you're collecting your own RUM analytics and you have your own RUM dashboard and it's warning you that across the plethora of users out there, there is a problem that needs addressing. You try and you fail to reproduce it locally. Why? Okay. This is a surprisingly common problem, and it is increasingly so. Um, for example, with CLS, this can happen. And certainly with the new responsiveness metric that we're trying to work on, well, INP. Uh, so when this happens, you're not quite sure, is the field data wrong? Has there been a problem in the past and it's been fixed on maybe you got lucky, maybe a fellow developer at your company has sort of fixed a patch and pushed it up because field data tends to lag, maybe even as much as 28 days. Maybe you're just blind, who knows? So this is not the main point of this presentation, but I think it's important to mention that this has always been true, is that your first step is to ensure you're testing the same site that your users are using. So between geo-specific sites and setting up the right geo, maybe the problem is localized to a specific set of users. Are you actually testing against production, or are you using some sort of staging or local build that doesn't exhibit the same issues? Very commonly, there are network differences or device-specific differences that you might need to set up specific caching conditions or whatnot. Then there's client-specific state. Maybe a particular user was logged in when this happened, or wasn't logged in, or maybe they were getting some sort of sign-up flow. Um, and then there could be sort of third-party client-specific state. Maybe certain ads were loaded. Maybe the user had certain extensions installed. A bunch of this type of stuff. So this is sort of groundwork that has been true for a very long time, and I wonder if there aren't things we can share collectively as to how this is typically done. But these days it's kind of a bit more than that, which is especially true for full page lifecycle metrics. Okay, so some feedback that we hear very often from developers is, for example, CLS was high in the field. Okay, I tested it locally. Maybe I just ran a Lighthouse report against it, which is a synthetic environment, and it only tests loading until like TTI or whatever. It doesn't interact at all with the page, and you get a CLS score of 0. And so the developer says, works for me, I'm moving on. I don't know what the issue was. Okay. But CLS is recorded not just during page load, it's also recorded post load. It's a full page lifecycle metric. And so it's important to understand, in your field data, were these high layout shifts happening during load or post load? If you know from field data that it's happening post load, you should know immediately that Lighthouse will never find that source of that problem. Okay. And INP is an interactivity metric. It's a responsiveness metric. So Lighthouse can never capture that type of issue. And even if you're trying to reproduce it locally, it could be many interactions deep. It could be with components that are interactive, that are below the fold. It could be hidden. It could take some amount of interacting with the page. And so right now it's kind of guesswork to try and find what was that long interaction for which user and why. And it can be difficult to reproduce locally. So if you are collecting your own RUM metadata or field metrics, not just recording the scores, but also recording metadata about how you generated those scores can be incredibly insightful. So if you are trying to track down CLS issues, it's not just about how much total CLS was there over the life of the page, but what was the time of your largest CLS window? Which element shifted the most? Which specific URL or route was the user on when that happened? And then for INP, the time of the interaction, which event was it a tap, was it keyboard? Which specific key was it? What element was being interacted with? And again, which URL and route? All of this metadata is very, very useful. So Philip Walton over at web.dev has written about this, focusing on CLS. He's written plenty of articles about measuring in the field, measuring in the lab, going from field to lab. And this is sort of a thing he built on his own, I think, personal site, and he published some recipes on how to do it. This is specific to CLS. So here, what he did was, alongside recording the CLS for a page, he recorded the single worst element to shift and how much it contributed to that shift score. Okay, so the single worst problem. And what he found is, in this particular sample site, which I don't remember which site it was, there's only one issue that sort of stands out once you have a table like this. So if you happen to have field data that suggests there's too much CLS for too many users, and you try to replicate, you would never have found an issue on mobile, because there are no issues on mobile. If you look at a table like this, even on desktop, there's just one specific type of element that was causing an issue. And if you see a table like this, it immediately jumps out at you. And if you're the page author, you might know exactly what this is a strong hint. You might know what's going on. And so in this case, only 18.5% of page visits, perhaps users, were hitting this case. And so what's the likelihood that you would have been able to reproduce it without a table like this to sort of guide you, if that makes sense? And this is CLS. CLS does tend to lean more heavily towards loading issues, but INP, very much so the opposite. INP can be a post-load metric first and foremost. And so, having a table like this could be very, very useful, for instance. Okay. Okay, so if you are already using an API like event timing to capture those long interactions, and you already have attribution about what type of event against which node was interacted at what time, there's this new set of features in Chrome DevTools and Lighthouse, which are centered around user flows. The ability to record a whole user flow and then replay it with lab automation, run an audit against it automatically. This is very useful for CI or for your own testing. But I thought to myself, as an experiment, would it be possible to take the performance timeline, the APIs we already have that run in the field, that you would already want to report for metadata, for a table like I showed before, could you construct a user flow that you could replay automatically in the lab? Okay, it's pretty easy to get set up with these tools. It's actually almost trivial to set this stuff up. And I just threw a couple of quick snippets. So this is a quick experiment. This is just a very simple way to go from a specific node to like a query selector. Very naive way to do it. There are more advanced ways. Every site might have a better way to do this, because selectors aren't always stable across renderings. But for many sites, this is good enough. And then in this case, I use the performance timeline, performance observers to use the navigation API and event timing. And all I did was say, what if I could get a list of things the user clicked on, in what order? That's all I was looking for in this particular case. And I created simple user flows like this. This is done in the field using performance timeline, stuff we already have access to. So in this case, this was me interacting with web.dev, clicking on like 4 things. And now I can replay using a snippet like this, using those tools I talked about earlier, the user flows tools. So this is actually under the hood using Puppeteer and Lighthouse together. There are a bunch of different ways to do this type of replay. And I think I have a video that it works. So that's a copy of just how little code there was to put it all together. It's somewhat of an older version. This is me replaying it locally. Lighthouse sets up a bit of an environment. You have some control over how you do this. In this case, it's setting up a mobile environment, emulating some device. And this is it replaying those interactions. I was worried when I set this up that I'd have to like scroll to the right position and toggle things, but it's pretty good at just finding those selectors and making sure to interact with it. And at the end, you get this sort of time span report, which looks very similar to a Lighthouse loading report. I will pause here. You get sort of screenshots as to what happened. You get similar breakdowns to metrics, but this is exactly what I actually did. And in this case, it found there was a high interaction to NextPaint. There was a high interactivity. And Lighthouse nowadays has audits for INP. So if you happen to record a time span, you'll get better breakdowns. And so in this case, there was like a lot of style and layout and then a lot of rendering delay afterwards. And so it kind of helps you figure out what was the problem, what was of all of those interactions, which one was the long one. Okay. Let me go to the next. There we go. After I did this quick experiment, and I was pleasantly surprised with just how easy it is to set up, there was a Twitter thread about just how cool web page test script automation can be. And there was some suggestion about if you have issues with an SPA navigation or with interactivity, you can actually script this stuff together. So I quickly took a look at the documentation there. It was very easy to set up. And I just made an alternative converter instead of using the user flows format, using the web page test scripting format, creating a little bit of a script like this. This is the exact same user flow. And out of the box, no problem, runs in web page test. And you get this very nice step-by-step. Now, I think web page test still is mostly a loading type audit. So I didn't see too many interactivity-based audits and things, but I'm sure it's more to come. But it was phenomenal to see just how easy it was to get set up. Okay. So with all of that, I think this is still a conversation. I think that the point is that the aggregate field data that your users experience, that's the truth. A single lab recording, a single lab replay is an anecdote, and it is very easy to miss seeing these real issues that are in field if you just have a couple of anecdotes and you're throwing darts at a wall. Setting up the right environment is first and foremost. You can get help there by understanding what environments your users are in. Following the right user flows is also an increasingly important with post-load metrics or full page lifecycle metrics. If you record metadata about your vitals, your field data can give you broad insights in a nice little table like that. And that might be enough that you will immediately know. If you're the page author, you're like, aha, I understand that, I've written that. But even beyond that, we might be able to use performance timeline to automate creating flows that you can replay and therefore get this, like, just do a full audit that definitely tells you what the source of the problem is, how much CLS, how much INP. So I thought that was neat. I think there's a lot of work left to do. I think the performance timeline is pretty limited. Event timing API has limitations. And so I think it's an open question as to how brittle will these approaches be? How much is left? Do we need to do more in terms of creating full sort of field data, user flows, and reporting it? Maybe we need a first-class performance timeline API for that. But that's all I have.
Cool. Let me stop the recording and we can discuss.